location independent. It gives you more room to work from home or work from a coffee shop or work on the beach somewhere, right? Because you don't have to be micromanaged. These are some must-have skills for remote network engineers. Now, what is a remote network engineer? And a remote network engineer is a network engineer that works remotely. Now, this engineer could possibly commute to some sort of central office and manage many other networks that are essentially connected to that central office, similar to the role that I'm in, or they can be remote, meaning at their homes or on a beach somewhere, and they might have multiple clients, networks they manage, right? And everybody wants to work remote. Everybody wants to have location independence, but when you are working remotely, you need an above average skill set, in technical skills and soft skills. Many people have asked me what it's like to be a network engineer, the day in the life of a network engineer. A lot of what I do is build networks. I built 14, going on to about 16 networks. And I would say 90% of the networks that I have built has been from home, has been remotely. And you need to have the above average skill set to be able to carry out the day in the life of a network engineer. It requires a lot of imagination, forethought, and ingenuity. And now I can't necessarily show what the day in the life looks like for me, but I know that there are a lot of YouTube videos out there that talks about the day in the life of a network engineer. And I'll also say this, I'm very early in my career. I've been in IT for 3 years, and I've been blessed with the opportunity to have built so many networks so early on. I think that is due to the fact that I do have an above average skill set with regard to soft skills, which is essentially, communication skills, and technical skills. But those two things work synergistically to enable me to have some sort of location independence. Now, I'm not completely location independent because I have more of a hybrid role where I go into the HQ and I work on networks remotely from there. Sometimes I go on site to work on networks, swap out a switch, swap out firewalls, swap out cables every now and again. And when I do work on rebuilding networks, I have a colleague that works with me. He's on site and he works on a lot of the layer 1 stuff, which is pretty great to have because you're gonna need somebody that's on site at the location that you're building the network or working on, right? So you need to be able to have these technical skills that give you enough context to maneuver around certain difficult situations. So I'll give you an example. It was my 4th network that I was building, and I was at the office and my colleague was on site. And so usually the process that we followed at that time was he would go on site, he would console into the switch, and I would remote into his laptop and I would issue the configuration commands from his laptop. Now, the problem here was that he forgot his console cable. And so he started kind of like, panicking because, he probably felt like we would have had to roll back all of the changes that we had made up until then. But that's where a little network ingenuity came into play on my end, because I decided that I can just push some of the configuration remotely over a VPN that we used to get access to the site. Now, I was able to configure a management IP that he could then SSH into on site because he had some Ethernet cables at his disposal, right? So I thought that up real quick because I did not want to roll back any changes. I've never, knock on wood, I've never had to roll back any changes that I've made during a maintenance window, such as a network build or firmware or something like that, right? I've always pushed on forward no matter what the issues were, right? And it's one of the things that I pride myself on. And that's not just strictly technical. That's also having some sort of soft skills that allow for you to be resilient in the face of issues like this, right? So I pushed some configuration that allowed for us to log into the switch via SSH using the management IP that I was going to configure for the network build anyway, right? So I'd already configured the firewalls. I've already changed a few other things on the back end, communicated with systems admin that runs one of our services as well. And I was not about to roll back anything. I just like to push forward. Like I said before, I just like to push forward, right? So with that being said, if you want to work remote, you gotta be responsible, right? There's the 3 R's that I like to call it, right? You gotta be reliable, responsible, and responsive. So being reliable means that you are on your A game at all times. And the reason why you have to be on your A game at all times is because the employer is trusting you to be independent enough to get your job done. When you say that you're gonna do something, you have to do it, or the employer is going to look at you like, this person's not reliable. Because believe it or not, an employee who is able to execute what they say they're going to execute makes that manager happy, makes them feel better. It gives you more competence privilege. It gives you more room to be location independent. It gives you more room to work from home or work from a coffee shop or work on the beach somewhere, right? Because you don't have to be micromanaged. So being reliable is very important. And I don't really hear many people talking about remote work in these terms and sort of like the employer side of it and what it takes for employees to actually be trusted with remote work. Because I see a lot of posts where people are more so joking about how they behave while they're working remotely, and employers see this stuff and go, oh, so that's what they're doing. That's what they're doing when, I'm sending them a Teams call and, trying to get in touch with them, right? So you got to be reliable. It goes into sort of like the story time I just gave you. Sometimes as a network engineer, there are so many moving pieces you have to account for. And these moving pieces, a lot of the times, are human beings. And human beings are prone to human error. So people make mistakes, people mess up. Are you going to figure it out, or are you going to yell at the person, or are you going to be snarky towards a person? Part of being reliable is understanding that people mess up, including yourself, and you just have to work around it and get the job done regardless. When you have that mindset, you make people feel good when you walk into the room. You make your teammates feel good when you walk into the room and they go, oh, he's here, right? I had that happen one time in my last role where something was going haywire, no one can figure it out, and I walk in, right, punch in, and one of my colleagues was like, oh, finally you're here, right? Because I always have a lot of good ideas. I'm tooting my own horn. I have a lot of good ideas. I like to push what can be done. I like to try different things out, and we was able to work around that issue, right? So being reliable is very important. The second R I'm going to talk about is being responsible. You have to be responsible. If you're not responsible and, therefore accountable, then why should you be trusted working remotely, right? If you're not responsible and you need somebody to constantly tell you that you need to push to hit this deadline, or you need to be told to take the initiative, to take the extra step, then it's going to be very hard for you to progress in this career and get the positions and work remotely like you want to work remotely, right? And again, this is all coming from my experience and realizing certain things about me that allows for me to have certain privileges in what I do. Now, the third and last R that I'm going to talk about is responsiveness. And this dovetails into sort of having good soft skills, communication skills. We see a lot of the memes with Microsoft Teams and how people hit you up first thing in the morning on a Monday morning and they're asking you questions and things of that nature. In my opinion, you need to be responsive to those things, right? Because it helps with collaboration and team morale and all of those fancy buzzwords that may sound cringe and corny, but it allows for you to work remotely. And we all know that, well, people that work remote and people that want to work remote and understand why working remote is such a huge deal or a big benefit is that, you know, if you're able to be responsive and keep that morale up, you have a lot of flexibility with what you can do with your time. Rather than commuting back and forth every day, you know, maybe you can commute 2 days out of the week and then you reclaim maybe 6 hours of commute time, right? So if it takes you an hour to get to work, an hour to come home, you know, and you're working 3 days remotely out of the week, working from home, you reclaim about 6 hours back. 6 hours that you can use to go to the gym or, you know, study for a certification, you know, just move yourself forward, right? But it's very hard to do that when you're commuting, and the stress of the commute wears you down too. So we understand that being responsive and allowing for that team morale by being responsive and collaborative it's a huge deal, right? So we have reliable, responsible, and responsive. A big one, a huge one is communication, right? You should be able to communicate what is going on and how it affects other silos in your department, right? So for example, if you are doing an access rule audit and you see that there's an access rule that's a little bit too permissive and you decide to change that, you should communicate that you're going to change that, and you should probably change that after hours. And you communicate that in an email and you let your team members know that you are doing an access rule audit and you're going to change an access rule that you may deem is too permissive. A lot of organizations have like change management and stuff like that, but in my role, we are a little bit more quote unquote agile where we make changes, we iterate on them, and we're good at communicating the changes that we make. And we, like I said, we iterate, right? Knock on wood, I've never changed something that impacted another system somewhere else in a way that caused like an outage or something like that. I've always tried to think through what I'm changing, and hopefully if it messes something up, I'm always able to, or I would always be able to just recover real quick, right? So communication is huge. It's very important. If you can't communicate, if you don't have a good base with communication, once again, remote work is going to be very hard for you to land and keep a long period of time. Just to recap, you need to have above average technical skills because you need to be able to utilize that technical skill, leverage that technical skill to work around certain problems. And you're able to do that with ingenuity. And I think ingenuity comes with having a high level of technical skill. This is kind of like a 3-in-1, right? The 3 R's, right? You want to be reliable, you want to be responsible, and responsive. If you're reliable, that boosts team morale, but your manager also is going to give you a lot more leeway if you know how to set your boundaries and have a backbone. But it allows for you to have a lot more leeway because a reliable person can be trusted and given a little bit more room to work in ways that allows for them to be happy with their work and at the same time execute what they're doing, right? And both parties are happy. You know, your manager's happy, you're happy. At the end of the day, this is all business, right? None of these situations is like, you know, we're family and stuff like that. It's a business at the end of the day, and you want to be reliable, and then you can have those positive familial feeling relationships, right? And, you know, it's a good deal for everyone, right? You also want to be responsible. You want to be responsible. If you have work that needs to be done, you get that work done, you take accountability for it, and you make sure you hit that deadline if there's a deadline, right? You want to be responsive. Responsiveness means that if somebody hits you up on Teams, you're going to respond to them because that allows for you to sort of have that in-office feeling, right? When you're in the office and, you know, somebody's sitting next to you or somebody's sitting across from you, or somebody's sitting diagonal from you, or coworkers, right? And they call you, right? They just reach over and they call your name. I would hope that you're going to respond to them, right? It's the same thing with Teams. If somebody's reaching out to you via Teams, it should kind of have that feeling. You know, if you have some focus time, then you put that in your team message, and people are aware that you're focusing on something. But the whole idea with responsiveness is that you don't want to seem like you're that person that is, you know, just off somewhere hiding, right? You want people to actually know who you are. And that's very important. It's very important in this field. It's not just about the technical skills, right? And from, you know, my perspective, I'm not like the typical, I guess, IT dude, or so I've heard. I'm very extroverted, but there's a lot of people that's in the IT field that's a little bit more introverted, and they rather be off in a corner doing something and not being bothered. But the issue with that is that when you don't have visibility and you're not networking with people and you're not helping with team morale, you're really not going to get the opportunities that you deserve, right? Because I know a lot of hardworking people that's very technical, very intelligent, but they like to be off in a corner somewhere and they don't get the opportunities that they deserve because people barely even know that they exist, right? And so that dovetails into the next point I want to recap on. Communication. You need to communicate. You need to be visible. You need to be able to communicate the changes that you're making, the impact it may or may not have. And also, you want to back that up with some technical expertise and be able to recover if you screw something up, right? So for example, an access rule audit where you feel like an access rule might be too permissive, you might want to change that. You might end up breaking something. We all end up breaking something at some point, but you want to be able to communicate that. It's part of being responsible, and tell other team members how it impacts them. And if you break something, you just simply fix it, right? And so the next point that I'm gonna make is that you need to also have a good imagination, right? A good imagination is your ability to get a good visual of your network, of your whole system, but of your network. That way, when something goes wrong, you don't have to ask the client, and which we're not really allowed to do, to FaceTime us so that we can see what port, you know, we need to look at and all of these things. You want to be as remote as possible in your approach, and the way that you're able to do that is by having a good imagination of what your network looks like, what the devices in the rack looks like. You should have a picture of it. And also, again, the most important thing is to have that visual, maybe through Visio. I use draw.io. First thing I did when I got into my current role was to create a whole diagram of the whole network that I manage, right? And I know what how many switch ports are at each site, how many firewalls are at each site. I know everything. That way, when something goes down, I know the IPs, I know all of that stuff. That way, when something goes down, I can troubleshoot it really quickly, right? You need to have a good imagination. You need to be able to create these diagrams, these topological diagrams, so that you're able to troubleshoot, so that you're able to fix this stuff efficiently, because nothing else sucks than something going down and, you know, maybe it's a Friday, right? Or maybe it's a Thursday or whatever it is. And you have to go out to the site because you don't really know what the network looks like. You're not really familiar with the network. You're not really familiar with the devices and all that stuff. And then you go out there and it's something that you really could have just did from your desk. You know, I always try to avoid going on site for something that can be dealt with remotely, right? You want to make sure you have that imagination, and how you build this imagination is by labbing. You might want to create a mock environment of your production environment and break things in the production environment and fix things in the production environment. Also, another skill that you need, and there's a bunch of skills, but I'm probably going to finish it off with this one. Another skill that you need as a remote network engineer is you need to be adaptable, right? So if we go back to the story that I just, told you about my colleague forgetting his console cable and me having to do some sort of network kung fu, a little network ingenuity. Out of that spawned my love for network automation, right? So that was probably the fourth or fifth network build I was working on. And I hadn't really gotten comfortable with the idea of network automation, right? I was really dragging my feet to understand network automation. But that situation right there spurred me to start considering network automation, pushing configurations, whole configurations to the devices that I want to configure all at once without logging into my colleague's laptop and then configuring the devices, sitting there spending all this time configuring the devices via the CLI, being a CLI jockey. Like, that wasn't really the wave, honestly. So what I ended up doing was I said, there's got to be a better way to do this without needing a console cable. You always want to be adaptable and understand how to iterate on processes so that, again, more automated and allow for you to do better work, higher quality work. And if you're comfortable with doing that higher quality work in a remote location away from the office, that's the advantage that you get when you are adaptable and you're forward thinking, right? And you always want to iterate on everything that you do. Right. Those are just some skills that I would employ you to learn. A lot of people ask me, what my role is like now, what the day in the life is. I can't film like a day in the life, but I can tell you some of the skills that I have that make my job so much more manageable and easy, right? Trying to see if there's anything here that I missed. I think I covered everything because I got some notes here. But all of this stuff, the communication aspect is something that I do want to expand on a little bit more. Communication, very important, because like I said, you don't want to be off in the corner somewhere, brilliant, being the most technical person in the room, but you don't have no clout. You don't have enough clout to show up in meetings and talk about the cool things that you're working on and how it impacts everybody, right? Right now, I'm leading like about 3 separate projects, right? And obviously one of them is building networks. The other one is cybersecurity awareness training. Another one is implementing some new features on our firewalls that bolsters security, right? I'm blessed to get to talk about these things. Also, I'm one of the AI evangelists at our organization, one of the AI evangelists there. And I get to talk about AI in meetings. I get to talk about security in meetings. I get to talk about the network builds that we do in meetings, some of the other security features that we're launching in meetings. And this is all on top of my technical expertise. This is where soft skills come in. You want to be able to speak to and articulate the technical skills that you're using to make your organization or whatever you're doing a better place, right? And again, if nobody knows you, how do you get certain opportunities? I mentioned in another video that I always market myself as a network engineer by trade, right? I consider myself now, I am a network security engineer because a lot of what I do is security stuff. People know that about me. People know that I'm very much into networking. And so when people want to build networks and people have questions about networks, they always hit me up, right? It's something that I love. Hopefully I'll be that guy with cloud networking soon and cloud in general, because I'm more transitioning to cloud and learning cloud technologies because, I sort of fell into it with regard to learning the automation stuff and the infrastructure as code stuff, right? But communication is very important because you want to be able to get in front of certain stakeholders, and it gives you a lot more opportunities in this field. When you're able to communicate and you're able to talk and speak to in an intelligent manner and articulate what you do, and you're doing it in front of some important people, just as important or more quote unquote important than you get more opportunities to do more of what you love and for higher pay. So those are some things, those are some skills that you need to have as a, remote network engineer. Now, the flip side of that is that you may ask, well, network engineers that work on site have to do the same things and yada, yada, yada. Now, That may be true, but it's also not true, right? Working remotely, especially now with a lot of companies pulling everybody back into the office with the return to office, it's going to be very competitive, right? Someone that is working on site or that's closer to the networks that they manage, they can always just take a ride out to the buildings that they work on, for the networks that they work on, right? If you really and truly want to work remotely, you have to have the skills at a bare minimum that I just explained, right? Because again, you need to be able to visualize. You need to have that mental capacity to know, and you need to have those network diagrams in your head. You need to understand what the nuances of each of those networks are so that you don't have to go out there and touch a piece of equipment, right? If you have a colleague that works on site, or if you know a technical client that works on site, you can always use them as your eyes and your ears, have them plug a cable in or what have you. It's one of those things, and you got to have the soft skills to be able to direct them. Sometimes they might be a little bit nervous. You might have to direct them and say, hey, listen, you're in IT just like me. You can plug a cable in, right? Or you can do this, right? There's many times I had to walk coworkers through or a colleague through something that was a little bit more technical than they were familiar with, and we got the job done, right? And this is why you need to have these above average skills to be able to do the remote work, right? I don't watch a whole lot of content on this stuff, so I don't really know if people are talking about the skills you need to have for remote work, right? Remote network engineer, right? And this goes for a lot of different aspects, right? A lot of different fields, covers a lot of different fields, but people have specifically asked me what it's like to be a network engineer and to work remotely as a network engineer. And these are some of the most important points. Like I said before, it's the most important skills that I have that allows for me to do my job. And I have a decent work-life balance where I can work 3 days remote, 2 days in the office, and I reclaim a lot of that time that I would be spending commuting and sitting in traffic. And so, that's pretty much that. I'm gonna make some more videos like this where I talk about the nuances or the behind the scenes of what it's actually like to be in this field. Because people think it's all glitz and glamour and all that stuff, but it's very heavy. It's very heavy to carry the responsibility of being an IT professional, right? Because people love you when things work, but when things break, forget about it. And especially if you're working remote, I've had things break while working remote. And one of the things that I had to learn to do is to stay calm and then keep, stakeholders calm as well, and just work through it, right? Keep my colleagues calm and just figure it out, right? I think it's a lot easier to do when you're on site because you have people physically there. But when you're working remote and you're sitting at your desk like I'm sitting, I have a special little desk here, and you're doing your work, it's just you. It's just you and your laptop. So I think that remote work, it requires above average skills, right? In a lot of different ways. So that's pretty much that. I'll keep making content like this because I do like talking about like I said, the nuances behind being an IT professional, specifically network engineer or network security engineer. And I'll talk to you guys next time. Peace.